years to figure out.
I bet. It's complicated.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. But it is complicated to figure out once you have it. It's not hard to do.
Yeah.
I guess. Like a lot of things in life, right?
Yep. Θυμάσαι τι είναι αυτό? Είναι μικρόφωνο. Ναι. Και τα βάλω εδώ.
Και τα ακούς.
Ναι.
Μπράβο.
Καλά?
Ναι.
Ωραία.
Ναι, τώρα είμαι καλά, είμαι έτοιμη. Κοίτα τον εδώ, βρε. Άμα θα τις δει πάλι, θα μου λέει πάλι τις φωτογραφίες αυτές. Είναι καλές οι φωτογραφίες, βρε.
Ναι.
Μη με λέτε.
Γιατί αγαπάς οι φωτογραφίες?
Γιατί σου φέρνουν αναμνήσεις.
Ναι.
Η ανάμνηση δεν μένει όλο το δάμε μέσα στο μυαλό σου. Και πρέπει να τις δεις ξανά για να θυμηθείς. Εγώ τα προσέχω όλα αυτά. Αυτός είναι ο... πώς το λένε, βρε. Θα τον θυμηθώ.
Δεν πειράζει.
Δούλευα. Αν δεν δούλεψα στη ζωή μου. Αν δεν δούλεψα στη ζωή μου, κανένας άλλος. Μην νομίζω ότι η δουλειά σας δεν σε σκοτώνει. Oh boy. Αλλά εγώ ήμουνα φοβητσιάρα από το φανοτροφείο. Γιατί ήμουνα 4 χρονών που με βάλανε η μάνα μου. Και εκεί πέρα ήταν κάθε καρδιά σκαρίδι. Χτυπούσαν τα παιδιά, μας τα είχαν. Λες και είμαστε τεμπέληδες, you know. Και με χτυπούσανε και εγώ δεν πού μπορούσα να τη βαρέσω, 4 χρονό παιδί, you know. Και αυτό με έκατσε μέσα στην ψυχή μου. Δεν μπορώ να το ξεχάσω. Εγώ ήθελα ήσυχη ζωή και δεν είχα. Παιδάκι μου. Εμένα μου αρέσουν αυτά.
Yeah, I like it.
Ναι.
Nice.
Ο φόβος με τρόμαζε η νύχτα. Η νύχτα ήταν, άμα βλέπω και εδώ τώρα που είμαι μεγάλη, με φοβίζει. Γι' αυτό εγώ δεν μπαίνω έξω ύστερα. Αλλά άμα είναι ο ένας μαζί μου δεν με πειράζει. Αλλά με φοβίζει η νύχτα εμένα, ναι. Αλλά τώρα που είμαι με ανθρώποι δεν φοβάμαι. Κάθομαι εδώ, κοιτάω έξω, μια καρούλα είναι.
Watch out.
Και ύστερα όταν έκατσα και ήρθε ο Άγιος Νικόλας, στο όνειρό μου, γιατί έκλαιγα. Έκλαιγα, really έκλαιγα. Και έλεγα, Άγιε μου Νικόλα, όπου και αν βρίσκεσαι, έλα να με πάρεις, να με βοηθήσεις λίγο, γιατί δεν έχω που να πάω. Ποιο είναι αυτό?
Σοφία Δέμπο.
Σοφία Δέμπο.
Όλες αγάπες γνώρισα,
Αγάπησα και χώρισα, μα όσο κι αν γυρνούσα, εσένα ζητούσα. Τα όνειρα τα χείλια μου, σε γύρευε τα χείλια μου, σε γύρευε η ψυχή μου, αγιά μου. Όσο θυμάσαι πάμε χρόνια που φύγαν χαμένα, πριν να γνωρίσεις εσένα, για τον παπά μου, για τον παππού σου.
μα πως φοβάμαι πως ίσως
Μια μέρα σε χάσω, τον έχασες.
σε χάσω, ποτέ δεν θα βρω.
Καλός. Ναι. Πάρ' το μάνα μου. Hello? Hello? Thank you, Jane. How are you, darling?
Thatcher does it again. Would you look at him go? He is unstoppable.
Finn, stop that.
Hey, Finn.
Hey, Dad.
I want to show you something.
Dad, all your old trophies. What happened to them?
I'm not talking about those. What do you think about the space? Be pretty good for some practice in the winter. Obviously not for shooting hoops, but you can get some workouts in. Won't get rained on. Nothing too breakable. Your mama like that.
I don't get it.
What's to get? It either works for you or it doesn't. So does it?
Yeah, it works great. Really, Dad? My old participation trophy from what, 8th grade?
Hey, it might be worth something someday.
Thanks, Dad.
Hello, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Youngjae Kim, and I'll be presenting an overview of my project titled The Gominam and the Gominyo, the pseudo-homosexuality of cross-dressing bodies in K-dramas. So what prompted me to pursue this topic for my project was actually re-watching a bunch of these relatively older Korean dramas, or K-dramas, with my mom over the summer. I myself am an avid viewer of K-dramas. Growing up, my mom and my grandparents always had the Korean channel on, and it constantly aired, well, Korean dramas. So naturally, I grew to like them, and to this day, I regularly consume K-dramas alongside other South Korean media. So this past summer, while re-watching all these dramas, I noticed a pattern, or I guess I re-noticed a recurring storytelling pattern, and it goes something along the lines of the following. A female protagonist cross-dresses so that she physically appears as a male. As the story progresses, she gets entangled with the male lead, and eventually he falls for her romantically, while thinking that she is a male. There's this will they, won't they conflicted yet comedic dynamic for a good chunk of this series, and finally, there's the reveal that the female protagonist is actually a female, only having pretended to be a male. In the end, instead of the truth becoming a bigger issue, the aura of conflict dissipates. The two express their love to one another, and everything becomes quote-unquote normal, as in heteronormative, and all ends happily. Alright, so what? What's the significance here? We can see similar narrative blueprints in media texts far more mainstream, like, for example, in Disney's Mulan. This isn't something incredibly far-fetched or beyond our comprehension as media scholars. But the central issue with this storytelling pattern lies within its prolificacy and popularity within a specific culture. Why is this storytelling pattern, involving the trope of female-to-male cross-dressing, or namjang, so prevalent and demanded by South Korean society? This was one of the driving questions behind my project, and it led me to more closely analyze the relationship between the intricacies of South Korean culture and the media texts that manifest alongside them. Now, the key players at the center of this phenomenon are 1. The gominam, and 2. The gominyo. Allow me to explain in further detail. The term gominam literally means flower beautiful man in Korean, It refers to a soft masculine identity that is marked by a male figure possessing traditionally beautiful and or androgynous physical features. The origins of the gominam can be traced back to the Bishonen identity. In the same vein as the gominam, the term Bishonen literally translates to beautiful boy in Japanese. But more than this, the Bishonen is portrayed as explicitly homosexual within yaoi, a genre of Japanese fiction that features homoerotic narratives between male characters. This socio-historical link between the gominam and the Bishonen is an important one to keep in mind, as it, intentionally or not, has paved the way for pseudo-homosexual narratives, in the form of namjang K-dramas for instance, to take precedence in the realm of mainstream South Korean media. As discussed previously, we understand that the central figure of these namjang K-dramas is the cross-dressing female protagonist, and as such, it wouldn't be appropriate to simply classify this character archetype as a gominam. Though she may physically appear like one by means of cross-dressing, she is ultimately a cisgendered female. Now this is where the gominyo comes in. Gominyo is a term I've coined to signify the female to male to female cross-dresser who takes center stage in these namjang K-dramas. She spends the majority of the story embodying the kind of soft masculinity that would typically be understood as the gominam by a South Korean audience. I argue that the gominyo is a part of a longer history of the gominam and its complex sociocultural roots. And an important distinction I'd like to point out between the gominam and the gominyo, besides their base physiological gender, is that the latter is a diluted continuation, or rather mutation, of the former. So in my project, I discussed the gominam's role in pioneering popular gay-themed media texts in South Korea, which consequently spawned the ever-successful namjang trope in K-dramas, giving rise to the manifestation of the female to female cross-dressing figure that I am calling the gominyo. I draw on a series of mainstream South Korean media texts, The King and the Clown, Coffee Prince, and You're Beautiful. From film to television, I trace the historical significance of the gominam and the gominyo, as well as the continuous dilution of the homoeroticism that these figures depict. And in the end, my project reveals how the gominyo's engagement in pseudo-homosexuality and her existing as a body of spectacle represent an echo chamber for the cultivation of mainstream popularity, sociocultural pandering, and queer exploitation at the expense of South Korea's LGBTQ community. As previously discussed, the gominam lends itself to the bishonen from Japanese yaoi narratives. The introduction of yaoi manga in South Korea subsequently formed a subculture surrounding its readership, as well as the prosumerism of gay-themed media texts, mainly consisting of young South Korean females ranging from those in their teens to their early 30s. The fact that yaoi held a notable influence in South Korea is pretty significant, because the very idea of explicitly or even implicitly gay-themed content went against the commanding heteronormative conservatism that has arguably shaped the East to this day. Yaoi presented a means of undermining this overbearing Confucian hold, steeped in patriarchy and heteronormativity. It was especially appealing to women, as the presumers of yaoi, as it presented an outlet to experience some sense of release and socio-cultural alleviation. Through this medium, and thus the narrative figures involved, the yaoi subculture in South Korea had found its answer to a demand of dismantling suppressed sexuality and consequently queerness and homosexuality. Despite its subculture origins, the gominam has become a very successful and an increasingly commercially viable masculine identity. This leads us to talking about one of the first mainstream media breakthroughs that feature the gominam and its underlying association with homoeroticism, The King and the Clown, released in 2005. It was truly one of the first gay-themed blockbusters that South Korea had ever seen, and this feat was accomplished by leveraging a key gominam figure named Kong-gil in the film. By accentuating his physical beauty and androgynous figures through means of yeojang, or male-to-female cross-dressing, the film in a way oversells and exploits the character's gominam identity. And as such, the major success and popularity of the film can be partly attributed to the youth female subculture that actively consumes gay media spectacles. But what's also important to note is that the film, while portraying homoeroticism to a certain extent, doesn't commit to it all the way. The King and the Clown imbues this idea of ambivalence in its production. It was more concerned with broad appeal and minimizing controversial aversion rather than creating an honest representational narrative featuring genuine gay bodies. In a way, the ambivalence in the film can be seen as a strategy anchored between a regressive maintenance of homophobic politics and a further cultural acceptance of homosexuality. To reiterate, this strategy of ambivalence was primarily utilized to minimize controversy while pandering to both subculture and traditional audiences in South Korea. The penultimate objective was to optimize the film for commercialization and increase viewership and popularity. The King and the Clown can also be accredited for ushering in a new wave of K-dramas that feature ambivalent homoerotic undertones and even the trope of cross-dressing. Piggybacking off of the success of gay spectacles on the silver screen, the transition into television introduced a few notable differences. The key differences being the introduction of the ever-popular and prolific namjang trope, and consequently, the introduction of its central female-to-male to female cross-dressing protagonist, the gominya. And the K-drama that was responsible for pioneering this specific trend was Coffee Prince. In fact, the vast majority of subsequent namjang trope K-dramas incorporate a similar narrative blueprint to that of this particular drama. Coffee Prince is also the media text that brought the pseudo-homosexual narrative into the K-drama meta. By virtue of the protagonist being female, only cross-dressing as a male, the drama is able to capitalize on, to a greater extent, what made gay-themed films such as The King and the Clown so successful. Coffee Prince and namjang K-dramas overall have access to the best of both worlds. They can appeal to youth female subcultures who we know enjoy yaoi narratives, but also to broader South Korean audiences who are more likely to want to consume conventional heteronormative media. Simply in changing the gominam to the gominyo, we are essentially diluting its narrative homoerotic potency. In this way, these dramas are still technically achieving the effect of romantically portraying two males on screen, while not actually doing so. Using the yaoi gominam subculture as a jumping-off point, the gominyo can be understood as South Korean entertainment's next logical step forward, with little to no offense caused and a wider audience achieved. In my project, I performed a close analysis of how the gominyo operates by using the 2009 drama You're Beautiful as a case study. I chose to analyze this specific media text because it initially presented some subversive potential through its ostensibly quote-unquote meta nature. For instance, the cross-dressing female protagonist in the drama is literally named Ko Mi-nyo, under the disguise of her twin brother whose name is Ko Mi-nam. It's by no accident that these names come across as self-aware. They're playfully alluding to the terms I've elaborated on in this presentation. In fact, the term gominyo took heavy inspiration from the naming scheme within this particular drama. You're Beautiful also spotlights K-pop and female fandom culture within its plot, another meta-commentary considering the phenomenon of the gominam identity. And unlike most namjang K-dramas, You're Beautiful carries out the gender reveal to the male lead by episode 2, which is much earlier than other dramas such as Coffee Prince or Painter of the Wind, which would hold off the reveal until around the latter half of the series. But that's about the extent to which You're Beautiful goes against following the namjang narrative blueprint. What's disappointing is that in every other way, the drama conforms to the harmful nature of the namjang trope. In fact, the earlier gender reveal could even be argued to further dilute the homoerotic undertone by removing the need for the male lead to feel any emotional turmoil in confronting his own sexuality. Throughout my analysis, I discovered that there's still a clear intent to scrutinize and spectacularize the gominyo. Homoerotic interactions are simply dismissed as comic relief. And finally, the relationship between the two leads only actualize once the gominyo officially reverts back to the traditional female character, the classic quote-unquote heterosexual ending. While You're Beautiful presented the potential of some subversive capacity, it ultimately failed to deliver. In essence, the namjang K-drama and its corresponding pseudo-homosexual cross-dressing figures grossly pander to the South Korean audience's desires to consume relatively tame and spectacular depictions of homoerotic narratives, again, without actually doing so. The gominyo strikes the optimal balance to attain mainstream popularity while juggling the politics surrounding sexuality in South Korea. The sheer abundance, commercial success, and popularity of the Namjang K-drama and the Gominyo point to how media production in South Korea has virtually succeeded in commodifying LGBTQ identities without authentically validating their lived experiences. There's simply no commitment to explore honest stories of LGBTQ identities. Many of these dramas, such as You're Beautiful, possess massive potential to do exactly this, but they intentionally hold back in favor of marketability. While it's not inherently harmful to portray heterosexuality, leveraging desires for the non-hegemonic by employing pseudoqueer bodies and drawing on their notions of novelty, taboo culture, entertainment, and spectacularization can be extremely destructive. The Namjang trope is a perfect example of a culturally targeted queer-baiting phenomenon. If nothing else, I hope that my project has successfully pointed out these persisting issues surrounding these pseudo-LGBTQ representations in mainstream South Korean media. I want to echo Jungmin Kwon in what the next steps should be moving forward. To achieve meaningful change, the most urgent priority should be to fill in the missing part in the process: LGBTQ Koreans themselves, focusing on gay people in worlds both mediated and lived. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. Finally, I'd like to take a minute to thank everyone who has helped me along this project and my experience in academia overall. First and foremost, Professor Defren, you've been such an amazing mentor and supporter both in and out of the classroom. None of this would have been possible without your guidance. A big thanks to my fellow peers within the critical media track. Everyone's meaningful feedback and our shared sense of struggle and solidarity really motivated me to the finish line. Diana Keeler, Professor Hossein, and Professor Fox, thank you all so much for cultivating such an enriching academic journey for all of us in media arts and culture. Lastly, I'd like to thank my family and my friends for always believing. You all mean so much to me. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Tell me everything's good when it's bad on the low, on the low, on the low. Tell me everything's good when it's bad on the low, on the low. 요즘 래퍼들이 거짓말을 막 해도 나와 상관없다고 그래서 내 태도는 사실대로 말해 절대로 거짓말 안 해 나와 상관없다고 그래서 내 태도는 You know I'm loving it 요즘 너무 좋아해 Yeah you know I'm getting to that though Yeah you know I'm loving it 요즘 너무 좋아해 쓸데없는 고민 없다고 Don't need no Gucci
Got ice around the necks like we the coldest climate. Watch out when you mess with us or it'll get violent. The gang we stay rare and exclusive, call us private.
Take it back 4 years ago to the end we play. This is R&B, jazz, hip hop, or pop EDM. Wanna say that it is, and it is, and it is. This is R&B, jazz, hip hop, or pop EDM. Wanna say that it is, and it is, and it is.
이 음악은 R&B가 맞는 것과 재즈인지는 잘 모르겠어. I don't know. 그렇다면 그런 거겠지.
Player one, get ready. We're about to start the round. Get your ammunition loaded. Like an action figure, you are always stuck in place, waiting for your puppeteer. Within your hollow form, midnight sun, you are not a soulless marionette. Let 'em know, 'cause dreams are. You are not an easy marionette. Close the curtain. Look at you, the label on your chest. Tear it off, it's time to hit reset. Look into a mirror, you can say it. I'm not okay, I'm not okay, I'm not okay.
사랑한 터라 힘이 들구나. 너와 이별은 아닐진데 하늘이 우릴 갈라놓아도 다시 올 테니 걱정 말아라. 아주 멀리 가네. 마른 가자고 내 굽을 치는 디님은 고 어서 가자.
Twist it.